The light they followed. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of dust that made Eleanor Whitfield's eyes water. Through the grimy window, she glimpsed the town of Cedar Ridge. If the collection of weathered buildings and muddy streets could be called a town. Her gloved hands smoothed the wrinkles from her best blue dress, the one she'd saved for this moment. 3 months of correspondence with Samuel McKinnon had led to this, stepping off a stage into the unknown to marry a man she'd never seen. The driver's gruff voice called down, "Cedar Ridge, miss." End of the line. Eleanor gathered her carpetbag and stepped into the harsh afternoon sun. The town smelled of horses, dust, and something she couldn't quite identify, perhaps hope mixed with desperation. She scanned the few people milling about, looking for a tall man with dark hair, as Samuel had described himself. Miss Whitfield. She turned to find a man approaching, hat in hand. He was indeed tall and dark-haired, but his face bore lines of worry that aged him beyond his 32 years. His clothes were clean but well-worn, and his boots showed the scuffs of a working man. "Mr. McKinnon," she said, offering a small curtsy, "I'm pleased to finally meet you." Samuel's smile seemed forced. "Welcome to Cedar Ridge. I hope the journey wasn't too hard on you." "Not at all," she lied, remembering the 3 days of cramped quarters and questionable food. "Thank you for meeting me." An awkward silence stretched between them as they studied each other. Eleanor noticed the worry lines around his eyes, the way his hands fidgeted with his hat brim. This wasn't the confident rancher his letters had portrayed. "There's something I need to tell you," Samuel began, then stopped as 2 small figures came barreling around the corner of the general store. Eleanor's breath caught. 2 identical boys, perhaps 7 years old, raced toward them with wild whoops. Their clothes, what remained of them, were caked with mud from head to toe. Their hair stuck up in every direction, and she could see streaks of dirt on their faces where they'd wiped their noses with muddy hands. "Pa, Pa," they chorused, sliding to a stop in front of Samuel. "We caught the biggest frog you ever seen." The taller of the 2, by perhaps an inch, held up a squirming green creature. "Billy says it ain't that big, but I say it's near the size of a chicken." "Tommy, put that thing down," Samuel said, his voice strained. "And where in tarnation have you boys been? Look at yourselves." Eleanor watched the scene unfold, noting how the boys' exuberance faded under their father's sharp tone. Their shoulders slumped, and they exchanged glances that spoke of frequent scoldings. "We was just playin' down by Miller's Creek," Billy mumbled. "Didn't mean no harm." "Any harm," Samuel corrected automatically. "And look at your clothes. What am I supposed to tell?" He stopped, glancing at Eleanor with embarrassment. The boys noticed her for the first time, their eyes widening. Eleanor felt her heart squeeze at their expressions, part curiosity, part wariness, as if they expected another adult to disappoint them. "Boys," Samuel said heavily, "this is Miss Whitfield. She's going to be your new mother." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Eleanor saw the boys' faces close off, their natural exuberance replaced by suspicious scrutiny. She knelt down, bringing herself to their eye level, unmindful of the dust on her good dress. "Hello, Tommy and Billy," she said softly. "That's quite a magnificent frog you've caught there." Tommy blinked in surprise. Most adults would have scolded them about the mud or demanded they stand straighter. You think so?" "Oh, absolutely. May I see him?" Hesitantly, Tommy extended the frog. Eleanor cupped her hands, and he carefully transferred the creature to her palms. The frog's skin was cool and slightly slimy, but she didn't flinch. "My goodness," she said, examining the frog with serious attention. "This is indeed a remarkable specimen. See how his coloring changes from dark green to light. That's perfect camouflage for creek stones. You know about frogs?" Billy asked, inching closer. "I know about many things that live in creeks and ponds. I grew up on a farm back in Ohio. We had a wonderful pond where I spent many hours watching the creatures that lived there." The boys exchanged another look, this one less guarded. Samuel watched the interaction with something like amazement. "We should probably let this fellow return to his creek home," Eleanor continued. "He's had quite an adventure today." "Aw, can't we keep him?" Tommy pleaded. "Well," Eleanor said thoughtfully, "how would you feel if a giant picked you up and carried you away from everything familiar, even if they meant well?" Tommy considered this. "I reckon I wouldn't like it much." "Exactly. But perhaps we could visit him at the creek sometimes. Friends don't always have to live in the same house to care about each other." Billy nodded solemnly and took the frog from Eleanor's hands. "Come on, Tommy, let's take him back." They started to run off. Then Tommy turned back. "Miss Whitfield, when we come back, will you tell us more about the pond creatures?" Eleanor's heart warmed. "I'd be delighted to." As the boys raced back toward the creek, Samuel shook his head. "I apologize for their appearance. Their previous caretakers, well, let's just say cleanliness wasn't their strong suit. previous caretakers, Samuel's expression darkened. My wife died 2 years ago in childbirth. The baby didn't make it either. Since then, I've had 3 different women help with the boys. The last one left a week ago, said they were too wild to civilize. Eleanor heard the pain in his voice, the frustration and exhaustion. I see. And that's why you wrote to the matrimonial agency. Partly. He met her eyes directly. I'll be honest with you, Miss Whitfield. I need a wife who can help raise those boys. They're good children, but they've had too many people come and go in their lives. They've learned not to trust easily. Eleanor stood, brushing dust from her dress. What happened to make them so muddy? Samuel sighed. They've been staying with the Hendersons while I've been preparing for your arrival. Apparently, they decided to explore on their own today. Mrs. Henderson said she turned her back for 5 minutes and they vanished. They're 7 years old, Eleanor said simply. Of course they're going to explore. That's what children do. The previous caretakers said they were incorrigible, or perhaps they were just being children with adults who didn't understand them. Samuel studied her carefully. You sound like you have experience with children. I helped raise my 4 younger siblings after my mother died. Children aren't puzzles to be solved, Mr. McKinnon. They're people with their own thoughts and feelings, just smaller and with less experience in the world. A commotion from the direction of the creek interrupted them. The boys were running back, but this time their faces showed excitement rather than mischief. Pa, Miss Whitfield, Tommy called. Come quick, there's a horse stuck in the creek. Samuel was already moving, and Eleanor hurried to keep up. They found a small crowd gathered at Miller's Creek, where a chestnut mare stood belly deep in the muddy water, one hind leg tangled in an old rope that had caught on a submerged log. That's Morrison's mare, someone said. Must have gotten spooked and run off. Been there near an hour, added another voice. Morrison's out of town. Won't be back till tomorrow. The horse rolled her eyes and snorted, clearly distressed but too exhausted to struggle much. Samuel waded into the creek without hesitation, but the mare shied away from him. Easy, girl, he murmured, but the horse only grew more agitated. Eleanor observed the scene, noting how the mare's ears pricked toward the sound of her voice, but flattened when the men approached. She had an idea. May I try, she asked. Samuel looked skeptical but stepped back. Eleanor moved to the creek's edge and began to hum, a low, soothing melody her mother had sung to their own horses. The mare's ears swiveled toward her, and gradually the rolling of her eyes ceased. Still humming, Eleanor waded into the creek. The cold water soaked through her dress and petticoats, but she paid no mind. She approached the mare slowly, maintaining the gentle melody. That's a good girl, she murmured when she was close enough to touch the horse's neck. Let's get you out of this predicament. The rope was tight around the mare's leg, but Eleanor could see it was more panic than actual entanglement keeping the horse trapped. She worked patiently, her hands gentle but firm, all the while humming and speaking in soothing tones. There we are, she said as the rope finally came free. Much better. The mare followed Eleanor willingly out of the creek, water streaming from both their forms. The small crowd murmured approval, and Tommy and Billy looked at her with something approaching awe. That was mighty fine work, said an elderly man Eleanor didn't recognize. Not many folks can calm a spooked horse like that. Animals respond to patience and respect, Eleanor said simply, though she was acutely aware of her sodden dress and the way it clung to her form. Just like people do. Samuel approached with his coat. Here, you must be freezing. Thank you. She wrapped the coat around her shoulders, grateful for its warmth and coverage. Someone should walk the mare to the livery stable. She'll need checking for any injuries. I'll do it, volunteered Billy. I know the way. We both will, Tommy added loyally. That's very helpful of you both, Eleanor said, but perhaps we should clean up first. We're all rather muddy. Samuel looked at his intended bride, her dress ruined, her hair escaping its careful arrangement, mud on her hands and shoes, and felt something shift in his chest. She hadn't complained once, hadn't fussed about her appearance or lectured the boys about their behavior. The house isn't far, he said. Mrs. Henderson had a bath prepared for you anyway, expecting you'd want to freshen up from the journey. As they walked through town, a bedraggled procession of one muddy man, one soggy woman, 2 dirt-covered boys and 1 patient horse, Eleanor became aware of the stares they attracted. She lifted her chin and smiled at the curious faces, refusing to be embarrassed by circumstances beyond anyone's control. The McKinnon house sat on the edge of town, a modest 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and well-tended vegetable garden. Eleanor could see evidence of a woman's touch in the curtains at the windows and the flower boxes, though they looked neglected. Mary planted those flowers, Samuel said, noticing her gaze. I've tried to keep them up, but I'm afraid I don't have her touch. Flowers need conversation as much as water, Eleanor said. Perhaps we can learn together what they're trying to tell us. Inside, the house was clean but sterile, lacking the warmth that makes a house a home. Eleanor noticed the boys' boots by the door, their coats hung on pegs clearly installed at their height, but little else suggested children lived here. Mrs. Henderson left stew warming on the stove, Samuel said, and she heated water for your bath upstairs. That's very kind. But first, perhaps the boys would like to clean up as well. It's been quite an adventurous day. Tommy and Billy exchanged glances. In their experience, adults who insisted on baths usually meant scrubbing with harsh soap and lectures about proper behavior. I could help,
help, Eleanor offered. Make it less of a chore and more of a game. What kind of game? Billy asked suspiciously. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. Well, in my family we had washing races. Who could make the most impressive soap beard? Who could get their hair to stand up the tallest with suds? The winner got to choose what story was told before bed. The boys' expressions brightened considerably. Really? Really? But first I think we need to heat more water. This looks like a job that will require reinforcements. As Eleanor helped the boys heat water and gather soap and towels, Samuel watched from the doorway. He saw how naturally she included them in the process, turning what had always been a battle into something they looked forward to. When was the last time he'd heard them laugh like that? An hour later, all four of them were clean and dressed in fresh clothes. Eleanor wore a simple green dress from her traveling bag, her hair braided down her back in a practical style. The boy's hair was slicked back neatly, though already beginning to rebel against the comb. Over supper, Eleanor learned more about her new family. Tommy was the more outgoing of the twins, quick to speak and laugh, while Billy was thoughtful and observant. Both boys clearly adored their father but seemed to walk on eggshells around him, as if afraid of disappointing him further. Tell us about the pond creatures, Tommy reminded her between bites of stew. Eleanor smiled. Well, there were the obvious ones, frogs and fish and turtles, but if you watched carefully, you could see water striders dancing on the surface, their feet never quite breaking through, and dragonflies that looked like tiny flying jewels. What's a water strider? Billy asked. Imagine a bug that can walk on water without sinking. They have special feet that spread their weight across the surface tension. Surface tension. Tommy looked puzzled. Eleanor thought for a moment, then filled a glass with water until it was slightly over full, the water forming a small dome above the rim. See how the water doesn't spill? That's surface tension, the water molecules holding hands so tightly they create an invisible skin on top. The boys leaned forward, fascinated. Samuel found himself equally engaged, amazed at how Eleanor could make even simple science sound magical. Tomorrow, Eleanor said, if your father doesn't mind, perhaps we could visit your creek and see what creatures live there. Could we really? Tommy asked, bouncing in his chair. Samuel hesitated. His instinct was to worry about muddy clothes and lost time, but seeing his son's eager faces, he nodded. I suppose a short expedition wouldn't hurt. That night, as Eleanor tucked the boys into the small room they shared, Billy spoke up quietly. Miss Whitfield, are you really going to stay? The question pierced her heart. I plan to, Billy. Why do you ask? The other ladies said they would stay, but they always left, sometimes without even saying goodbye. Eleanor sat on the edge of his bed. That must have been very hard for you. Tommy cried when Miss Sarah left, Billy confided. But don't tell him I told you. I won't. It's perfectly normal to cry when someone you care about leaves. It shows you have a big heart. Do you have a big heart? Tommy asked from the other bed. Eleanor smiled. I think so. Big enough for two boys who catch frogs and know all the best places to explore anyway, even when we get muddy. Especially when you get muddy. Mud means you've had an adventure, and adventures are how we learn about the world. As she said goodnight and headed downstairs, Eleanor found Samuel sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of coffee. They're good boys, she said softly. They are, but they've been through so much. I sometimes think, he stopped, shaking his head. What do you think? That maybe they'd be better off with someone who knew what they were doing, someone who could give them the mothering they need. Eleanor poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from him. Samuel, may I ask you something? He nodded. When your wife was alive, did you always know what you were doing as a father? Mary made it look so easy. She always knew what they needed, how to make them laugh when they were sad, how to calm them when they were upset. And now I feel like I'm failing them every day. They're wild and undisciplined, and I don't know how to fix it without being so strict that I break their spirits. Eleanor leaned forward. What if they're not broken? What if they're just grieving? Samuel's head snapped up. Grieving. Think about it. They lost their mother, then their baby sibling they never got to meet, then a parade of caretakers who came and went. They've learned that the people they care about disappear, so they act out, they test boundaries, they see how much trouble they can cause before the next person leaves too. You think that's what they're doing? I think they're 7-year-old boys who've had their world turned upside down multiple times, and they're doing the best they can to make sense of it all. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. The previous caretakers said I needed to be firmer with them, more discipline, stricter rules. Children do need boundaries, Eleanor agreed, but they also need to know that love isn't conditional on perfect behavior. They need to know that even when they make mistakes, the people who matter will still be there. And you think you can do that, even though they're not your blood? Eleanor considered the question seriously. Blood doesn't make a family, Samuel. Love does. Commitment does. Showing up every day, even when it's hard, that's what makes a family. Even when they track mud through the house and let frogs loose in the kitchen? Eleanor laughed, especially then. Those are the moments that become the stories you tell when they're grown and have children of their own. Samuel studied her face in the lamplight. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone more conventional, I suppose. More concerned with propriety and keeping things neat and tidy. I can keep things neat and tidy, Eleanor said with a smile, but I've learned that the most important things in life are often a little messy. Over the following weeks, Eleanor settled into the rhythm of the McKinnon household. She kept the house running smoothly, but allowed room for the chaos that comes with active children. She turned chores into games, lessons into adventures, and slowly the boys began to trust that she wasn't going anywhere. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. There were still muddy clothes and broken dishes, arguments and tears, but gradually the house began to feel like a home again. Eleanor hung new curtains in the kitchen, planted herbs in the garden with the boys' help, and filled the rooms with the sound of laughter. Samuel found himself falling in love, not just with Eleanor but with his sons all over again. Seeing them through her eyes, he remembered their curiosity, their resilience, their capacity for joy. She never made him feel like a failure as a father. Instead, she showed him his strengths and helped him build on them. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Tommy climbed into Eleanor's lap while Billy leaned against her chair. "Tell us about the stars," Tommy requested. Eleanor began to point out constellations, weaving stories about the pictures they made in the sky. Samuel watched his family, for that's what they had become, and felt a contentment he'd thought lost forever. "Eleanor," he said softly. "Yes, thank you, for seeing what they needed, for seeing what I needed." She reached over and took his hand. "We all needed each other. That's what families do, they fill in each other's empty spaces." Billy looked up at her. "Mama Eleanor, will you always be here?" "Always is a very long time," she said carefully, "but I plan to be here for every adventure, every scraped knee, every frog you find, every question about stars. I plan to be here until you're grown men with your own families, and even then you'll always have a home with me. Promise?" Tommy asked sleepily. "I promise." As the stars came out one by one, the McKinnon family sat together in comfortable silence. Eleanor had arrived expecting to find a husband and a new life. Instead, she had found her purpose, to be the light that guided two little boys through the confusion of growing up, to help a grieving man remember how to hope, and to build something lasting from the scattered pieces of their lives. The muddy clothes still appeared regularly, and there were still frogs to be rescued and adventures to be had. But now there was also consistency, love, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you belong. In the years that followed, people in Cedar Ridge would often comment on the McKinnon family, how the boys grew into fine young men, how Samuel's ranch prospered, how Eleanor became a beloved figure in the community. But those who knew them best understood the real magic. It wasn't that Eleanor had changed the boys or fixed what was broken. She had simply loved them as they were, and in doing so had given them the freedom to become who they were meant to be. And on quiet evenings when the chores were done and the family gathered on the porch, you could still hear Eleanor's voice weaving stories about pond creatures and star pictures, while two growing boys, no longer quite so muddy, but still filled with wonder, listened with the same rapt attention they'd shown that first day by Miller's Creek. She had indeed become the light they followed, but they had become her guiding stars as well, showing her that home isn't a place you come from, but a place you choose to build with the people you love.